Another episode cleared for public release. And just barely. And if you've made it this far into the season, there's a pretty good chance you recognize something. Not in theory, not in some abstract other company scenario, but in your own environment, in your own files, in your own processes, your own decisions, and maybe not all at once, but maybe in some small moments along the way. You know, something felt just a little off. Not broken necessarily, not alarming, just off. Like something that works, but only because nobody's looked at it too closely. And that feeling, that's what we're talking about today.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.
Broadcasting from deep inside the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth, this is the GovCon Show. This show is for acquisition pros, wannabe pros, and procurement insiders who need a place to unpack the chaos. We speak fluent contracting and sarcasm. No clearance required. This is the GovCon Show. And away we go!
Welcome back to the GovCon Show. Just so you know, a clearance is not required to view this episode. Now, whether you're new to the game or you have been doing this for 20 plus years, you already know this isn't just paperwork. You know, sometimes it's chaos. We've all seen it and we all talk about it, honestly. With a little sarcasm and a whole lot of truth. And at the GovCon Show with just enough attitude to keep it real. No filters, no fluff, just real conversations from the front lines of government contracting. And today, we're not introducing a new topic. We're not breaking down a clause. We're not walking through a process. We're doing something a little more uncomfortable than that. We're connecting everything we've already talked about. Because if you've been listening to this season from the very beginning, you might think we've been jumping around. Flowdowns, teaming agreements, kickoff meetings, sole source justifications, non-disclosure agreements, looping contracts in. Oh, and let's not forget the TikTok experts. God help us. Feels like a mix of topics, but it's not. And believe it or not, there's been a pattern to the madness. That list, it does. It feels like a mix of topics, except it's not, because there's been a pattern this entire time. And today, we're going to call it out. Let's walk through it. We talked about flowdowns that get passed downstream without anyone really understanding what they mean. We talked about agreements that get signed under pressure because we just need to keep things moving. We also talked about justifications that sound right but don't actually hold up when someone reads them very closely. And then we talked about the sacred ceremonies of kickoff meetings that create confidence, but they don't actually create clarity. We also talked about NDAs that exist but don't really protect anything. And then, of course, we talked about contracts getting looped in right when everything starts to go sideways. We even talked about learning compliance from TikTok, which honestly still hurts me to say that out loud. Now, individually, those are just moments, annoying moments, frustrating moments, and sometimes funny and sometimes painful, but still, they're just moments. But when you look at them all together, that's not random. That's not a pattern. If you're wondering how or why I say it's a pattern, well, here's the thing. None of those things feel like a system. None of those things feel like system problems, even when they happen. They feel like one-offs, a rushed agreement here, a weak justification there, a quick kickoff meeting that didn't quite land, and there's nothing there that feels big enough to really even matter. Nothing that feels like it defines how your system works. Until you step back and realize, well, it's not one thing, it's the same thing. It's just showing up in different forms. And that pattern points to something most companies don't want to admit. I have said it over and over again because it's true. Most procurement systems don't fail because the people don't care. They fail because decisions aren't connected. Logic isn't consistently applied. And documentation doesn't tell a clear story. So what you end up with is not a system. It's a collection of habits held together by like experience or tribal knowledge and people who know how things work. Until those people aren't there anymore, or worse, until someone else is the one reviewing it. You see, that's how the illusion gets created. I call it the illusion of it's working. Because here's the trap. Nothing is breaking. No one is escalating issues. No customer is complaining or screaming. And there's no audit findings that are hitting your desk. So everything feels just fine. But fine is not a standard. Fine just means no one's looked closely enough yet. Because it's working usually means no one's been forced to explain it yet. The files haven't been challenged. The decisions haven't been questioned. The system hasn't been tested without the people who built it. And that's where the illusion lives. Not in what you're doing wrong, but in what hasn't been looked at closely enough, and eventually something changes. You know, a CPSR. Maybe it's a bad CPARS rating. Maybe it's a contracts issue that gets escalated. Or maybe it's something smaller. One file, one subcontract, one decision, and maybe it's just that one file, just one, pulled out of thousands of files. And someone who wasn't there starts asking questions. And boom, everything changes. Everything flips. And here's where it stops being theoretical. Let me walk you through what that actually looks like, because I've seen this play out more times than I can count. A file gets selected, no big deal, right? You've got your emails, you've got your quotes, you've got your approvals, everything's saved into the file, everything's there. You're thinking, well, great, this is fine. Then the questions start. Walk me through your price analysis. Explain how you determined this was fair and reasonable. Can you tell me why this vendor was selected? Can you show me where is the documentation supporting that specific decision? Suddenly, your whole world changes, because now it's not about what you meant, about what made sense at the time, or what everybody understood was going on at the time. And surprise, suddenly everything changes, because now it's all about what can you prove. And this is where things start to unravel. Your file problem is suddenly revealed because the file, that's the thing that's supposed to tell the whole story, usually doesn't. Because the answer to the reviewer's questions usually sounds like, well, we talked about it. Or, well, at the time it was very obvious. We had data, we just didn't include all of it. You know, this was such a high priority, we were moving so fast. And the person reviewing it, they don't care. Not because they're difficult, not because they don't understand, but because they weren't there. And that's where the gap shows up. You know, the gap I'm always talking about? The gap is now your file problem. You know, that problem you didn't realize you had, but now it is suddenly revealed because the file, the thing that is supposed to tell the story, it doesn't. It usually doesn't. Oh, you believe the file has everything. Emails, quotes, approvals, attachments. Oh, it's all there. But nothing connects. There's no clear logic, no consistent reasoning. And worst of all, there's no defensible narrative. And when that happens, the story doesn't just disappear, it gets rewritten. Oh, not by you, by the person reviewing the file. And boy, that hurts. And even though you sort of expected it, it often catches you off guard. And now you're sitting there thinking, well, of course it makes sense. I was there. I know what happened. You remember the conversations. You remember the trade-offs you made, the urgency. Oh, you know what happened. But they don't. And all they have is what's in front of them. And if that file doesn't tell a clear story, then they have to define it. And being brutally honest, when someone else defines your file, they're not giving you the benefit of the doubt. They are identifying risk. They are identifying those gaps. They are identifying non-compliance. And once that starts, it doesn't stay in one file, because here's what happens next. They don't say, oh, this file has an issue. They say, well, show me more like this. Now you've got a sample. Now you've got a pattern. Now you've got a system problem. And that's where companies get blindsided, because they thought they had a documentation issue or a training issue, maybe a one-off mistake. But what they actually had was a system that never worked the way they thought it did. And now it's exposed. Not internally, but externally. This is your risk. And this is the part that people miss, because the situation is exactly where your real risk lives. The risk is not bad people. It's not even bad decisions. Your risk is systems that rely on memory or depend on interpretation, or only work when the right people are involved, because those systems that don't scale, they don't transfer, and they definitely don't audit well. Which means you always have to be mindful of your internal blind spots. And honestly, this is the part that makes this so hard to fix. You're inside the system every day. You see the context, the urgency, and the trade-offs. So everything makes sense to you. But if you saw the same file somewhere else, a different company, a different team, you'd have questions. That's the best way I know how to explain it to you, what the gap is. That right there. That's the gap between it makes sense to me and it holds up under review. Most companies live right in the middle of that gap. Comfortably. They live confidently. They're completely unaware. They are completely unaware of how exposed they actually are. So what do you do with that? Because that is where most conversation stops. They end with, well, we should document our files better. No, that's not it. That's not your problem. That's service level thinking. The real shift is you stop thinking about files as records, and you start treating them like arguments. You know, every file should answer, what decision was made? Why was it made? What options were considered? And why were those options rejected? Most importantly, would someone who wasn't there agree with our outcomes? And if the answer to that question is probably, you've got a problem. Now, you see, Do you see that everything we talked about this season, every episode, it all comes back to this? Flowdowns without understanding, then there's no logic. Teaming agreements under pressure, then there's no discipline there. If you've got weak SSJ, there's no defensibility. Kickoff meetings without clarity, then there's no system alignment. NDAs that don't protect anything, no purpose. Looping contracts in too late, then there's no internal controls. And if you're getting your information through TikTok for your compliance needs, there's no chance. Different topics, but they're all the same problem. All right. So here's where I'm going to push you a little, because this matters. If your system only works when the right people are involved and the context is understood and nobody asks hard questions, then your system doesn't work. You're just getting away with it. And that's what Audit-Lucky really is. It's not capability. It's not strength. It's not compliance or timing. And timing runs out, by the way, because eventually someone looks closer. Someone asks better questions. Someone pulls the wrong file. And when that happens, you don't get judged by what you meant. You don't get judged by what you knew. You don't get judged by what made sense at the time. You get judged by one thing, and that's what your system actually produces. And if your system can't explain those decisions and show that logic and demonstrate consistency, someone else will define it for you. And once they do, you don't control the story anymore. That's your risk. That's the reality. And that's why Audit-Lucky works right up until it doesn't. All right, this is the GovCon show. If you would, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell your friends about us. The GovCon show is a place where government contracting pros stop pretending policies sound good until they meet reality. And if you've been listening this season and you've recognized pieces of your system in these episodes and you thought, yeah, we do some of that, you probably do. Most companies do. That doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you're normal. And in government contracting, in this profession, normal is exactly what gets exposed. Because Audit-Lucky works right up until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, it's never small. Now the question is simple. Are you going to fix it, or are you going to wait until someone else defines it for you? If you want to fix it, you already know where to go. And if you want to learn about it, you know where that is too. But either way, don't sit in the middle. That's where the risk lives. We'll see you in season 2. And yeah, this episode was cleared for public release, but just barely.
If today's episode sounded a little too familiar, that's probably a sign. Until next time, keep your files tight, your logic tighter. Remember, if your compliance approach is built on checking boxes, you're building risk. We'll see you next time on the GovCon show.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.